17-year-old British girl Victoria Hall spent a September evening in 1999 at a nightclub with her best friend. In the early hours of the morning, the pair opted to make the 2-mile journey home to their village on foot. Before separating to make the final 300-yard walk to their homes alone, Victoria hugged her friend and promised to call her later that morning. That call would never be made, and Victoria was never seen alive again. Her body would be discovered days later, and the investigation that followed would become one of the largest in the history of Suffolk Constabulary. With an acquittal in court, strange CCTV, and the questioning years later of a man who would become known as the Suffolk Strangler. This is the story of the unsolved case of Victoria Hall. Victoria was known to friends and family as Vicky. She lived with her mother Lorinda, father Graham, and 15-year-old brother Stephen in the village of Trimley St Mary, Suffolk, in the south-east of England. The village is less than 2 miles from the nearest town of Felixstowe and, according to the 2011 census, is home to less than 4,000 people. Victoria is described as happy, vivacious, caring, and a quote, model daughter. Her interests were typical of that of a teenage girl growing up in the 1990s. She loved dresses, music, and dancing, the Spice Girls, and Leonardo DiCaprio. Victoria was also intelligent and ambitious. She worked part-time alongside studying psychology, business studies, and English at sixth form, and had plans to attend university after completing her A-levels. Victoria was just beginning to find her independence. It was Saturday, September 18th, 1999. Victoria and her closest friend Gemma Algar spent the night in the Bandbox nightclub on Bent Hill in Felixstowe. They left Trimley St Mary around 9 p.m. and arrived at the venue shortly thereafter. The pair danced and, according to Gemma, had a great night, before leaving at around 1 a.m. Together, Victoria and Gemma made the decision to spend money reserved for their taxi fare on food and to instead walk home. With their chips in hand, they left the nearby Bodrum Grill takeaway restaurant and made the 2-mile walk home. Gemma recalls that the pair removed their shoes and talked and sang before arriving at the junction of High Road and Faulkner's Way, where they would separate at around 2:20 a.m. Victoria turning right onto Faulkner's Way and Gemma continuing along High Road. Moments later, Gemma heard what she thought sounded like 2 high-pitched screams. Describing the screams later, Gemma said, quote, "I heard a scream. It was 2 kind of high-pitched screams. I thought it was just somebody messing about. I didn't think anything else of it that night." Gemma arrived home and went to bed. Victoria did not make it home. Hours later, and with no trace of her to be found, Lorinda and Graham Hall called the police to report their daughter missing. Suffolk Constabulary carried out door-to-door inquiries and, alongside Victoria's father, made a public appeal for information. From this, thousands of calls and tips were received, and the local community was galvanised. A specialist search team with the Royal Military Police was deployed alongside search dogs and a helicopter. Forests, fields and farmland were scoured. An unnamed 21-year-old man from Ipswich was questioned and later released without charge. Victoria's ex-boyfriend, 21-year-old electrician Christopher Lambert, was interviewed by police for 18 hours and his vehicle, a Vauxhall, was taken away for testing. He categorically denied any involvement in Victoria's vanishing and was subsequently released without charge. Days later, on Friday, September 24th, the search was called off. Victoria had been found. Creting St Peter local Jim Armour took his pet dog out on their usual walk along Creting Lane. Jim entered a field off the main road where his dog would usually run free. Bizarrely, on the morning of the 24th, Jim's dog stopped abruptly and began to growl at something in a water-filled ditch to the side of the field. Jim didn't immediately notice what his dog was growling at and simply called her away. The two returned home, but Jim couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the field. After confiding in his family, Jim and his wife returned to Creting Lane to further investigate. They noticed what appeared to be a dummy or mannequin partially submerged in the ditch. Of course, it's never a mannequin, and Mr. and Mrs. Armour had in fact found the body of Victoria Hall. Suffolk police attended the scene and Operation Avon was launched. Victoria had been found naked. Not a single item of clothing, nor any of her personal belongings, has ever been recovered. These include a black dress, a pair of toeless heeled sandals, the sole of at least one of which was held together by tape, a distinctive wooden hair clip, a black New Look zip purse containing a house key on a fob which had Vicky printed across the top and Victoria along each side, a Rimmel lipstick in a black plastic case, the colour of which is believed to have been Zorro, and a jacket similar to the one pictured here. There are conflicting reports about the colour of the jacket. Some news sources say that it was tan coloured, while the one in this picture, provided by police, is red. 2 post-mortem examinations were carried out on Victoria's body, but neither would conclusively reveal the cause of her death. A Home Office pathologist found that a degree of asphyxia was involved, and that Victoria had likely been suffocated. The only mark to her body was a single bruise on her back, and there were no signs of sexual assault. It was estimated that Victoria had died within 2 hours of parting with Gemma. The lack of bruising, scratches and other marks indicated to police that Victoria had little opportunity to resist her attacker before she was killed. The scene and surrounding area yielded little else of evidentiary value. Despite the lack of certainty over the cause of death, what was clear to pathologists and police is that Victoria had been murdered. Operation Avon tracked down attendees of the Bandbox nightclub from the evening of the 18th and visited the venue on several occasions to speak to revellers about the case. CCTV footage showing Victoria at the venue on the night, as well as footage of her from the weekend prior, was released alongside a renewed public appeal for information. From this, 550 people came forward to speak to police. It was found that a woman was assaulted in an alleyway near the Bandbox just a week before Victoria's death, though this attack was never linked to Victoria's case and there is no record of this crime online. A few hours after the approximate time that Victoria's body had been discarded in Creting St. Peter, a vehicle was found burning on farmland just a mile away. The vehicle was a red 1989 Subaru 1.8 GL Estate with the registration F206DH. The vehicle was so badly burned that forensic testing was unviable. What police were able to ascertain using the vehicle's registration, however, was that the car was sold by a garage in Rawmarsh, South Yorkshire, around 170 miles away, on March 23, 1999. The man who purchased the car gave the name Paul Sanderson, and he is described as being white, aged in his 30s, around 5 feet 6 inches tall, of medium build, clean shaven with fair to light brown hair. It's unknown if police were ever able to trace the owner of the car or to eliminate the vehicle entirely, though media outlets stopped reporting on this vehicle in around 2001. Speaking about the vehicle in 1999, Superintendent Rory Lambert said, quote, "The fact that this car was dumped and set alight within hours of Vicky going missing is obviously suspicious. However, we do not have anything to connect the car to her death, and we would stress that the car was originally set alight some distance from where Vicky's body was found. There is no obvious route between where Vicky's body was left and where the car was abandoned. anyone who attempted to walk between the two places would have had to cover over a mile of farmland and would probably have been covered in mud. While the investigation continued, the community of Trimley St Mary rallied around the Hall family. A prayer service attended by over 400 people was held at the village church, and the family were inundated with flowers and cards. Victoria was buried in November. 13 months later, an arrest was made. Adrian Bradshaw was arrested on December 18th in the year 2000 and was subsequently charged with Victoria's murder. Mr. Bradshaw, aged 27, was a local businessman who ran a free-sheet newspaper, the Felixstowe Flyer, and lived in Trimley St Mary at the time of Victoria's death. Mr. Bradshaw would spend almost 12 months on remand before his case was finally brought before Norwich Crown Court in November 2001. The prosecution's case against Mr. Bradshaw relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. They alleged that 1. Mr. Bradshaw was in the Bandbox nightclub on the evening of September 18th at the same time as Victoria, something that Mr. Bradshaw admitted. 2. That Mr. Bradshaw was drunk. Again, Mr. Bradshaw admitted to drinking 10 pints of beer as well as vodka that night. 3. That Mr. Bradshaw exited a taxi which he shared with a friend and 2 women close to the junction of High Road and Faulkner's Way where Gemma and Victoria parted. Mr. Bradshaw's travelling companions testified to this fact. 4. That Mr. Bradshaw lied when he told police he actually exited the taxi at his home around half a mile away. 5. That Mr. Bradshaw often parked his car, a distinctive blue Porsche, outside his father's address near the junction of High Road and Faulkner's Way. 6. That in the early morning hours of Sunday 19th of September, Mr. Bradshaw, after following behind Victoria, abducted her, using his nearby car as a getaway vehicle. Mr. Lawson QC said, quote, "It means that Mr. Bradshaw was in exactly the same area at exactly the same time as Vicky Hall. It is an area about which he lied." 7. That the screams heard by Gemma Algar were also later independently reported by several other neighbours. 8. That alongside those screams was heard and reported the sound of the, quote, "throaty exhaust of a car," a distinctive sound that allegedly matched that of Mr. Bradshaw's own vehicle. 9. That about 10 days after the murder, Mr. Bradshaw visited a female client who had heard the, quote, "throaty exhaust." Mr. Lawson QC said, quote, "She, the client, was immediately struck by the similarity of the sound of his, Mr. Bradshaw's, exhaust." 10. The final piece of evidence, and the only forensic evidence offered against Mr. Bradshaw, was 10 grains of mud found on the accelerator pad of his car, which soil expert Professor Kenneth Pye of London University said bore a, quote, "striking similarity to soil in the ditch where Miss Hall was found." Mr. Bradshaw's defence dismissed much of the circumstantial evidence against their client. They attempted to have the case thrown out halfway through on the grounds that the evidence against Mr. Bradshaw was flimsy. Judge Mr. Justice Moses overruled this application and said that there was a case for the jury to consider. In his defence, Mr. Bradshaw's legal team 1. Called the geologist who testified that the mud recovered from Mr. Bradshaw's vehicle could have come from elsewhere in East Anglia. 2. Called several character witnesses, including a witness to testify that Mr. Bradshaw was a, quote, "happy drunk who, quote, did not have a malicious bone in his body." Mr. Bradshaw denied seeing Victoria. He insisted that he had nothing to do with her death and maintained he had gone straight to bed after being dropped off by the taxi. He also insisted that he had never been to Creting St. Peter. After 2 weeks, the trial concluded, and it took just 90 minutes for a jury to return a verdict of not guilty. Outside court, Mr. Bradshaw said, quote, "Obviously my sympathies go out to Vicky Hall's family. A jury of 12 normal members of the public have reached the verdict. I had confidence in myself. I did not commit this crime. I am innocent. Simon Nichols, Mr. Bradshaw's solicitor, said after the verdict, quote, 2.5 years ago this investigation started. 18 months ago, Adrian Bradshaw was first spoken to. He has spent a year of his life come Christmas in prison, and in just over an hour a jury unanimously acquitted him. This vindicates the fact that he has always protested his innocence throughout the whole investigation. Now, after a long and traumatic period in his life, justice has been very clearly done. For the Hall family, the search for justice in their daughter's case would have to go on. Many public appeals and police case reviews were carried out down the years. In 2019, Suffolk Constabulary announced that to mark 20 years since Victoria's murder and following an unspecified recent tip, the case was being reinvestigated by a new team of detectives. 25 officers and police staff were assigned to the case with support from the National Crime Agency. A renewed appeal for information was made, and as part of the reinvestigation, the Operation Avon team took statements from over 500 witnesses, reviewed over 43,000 documents and 9,000 exhibits, and viewed more than 3,500 hours of CCTV footage. The movements of 70 individuals on the night of the 18th were assessed, and dozens of calls were received from the public. Police also released CCTV footage that may be linked to Victoria's case. In the first piece of footage, captured on October 7th, 1999, around 20 days after Victoria's death, we see the entrance to the field in Creting St Peter where her body was found. The clip appears to show a van stopping at the field entrance before reversing and then driving forward to the entrance again, at which point the driver gets out and enters the field. He appears to be scanning the ground around him. The second clip, captured from the same location and taken at 7:47 p.m. on October 18th, 11 days later, shows a group of people entering the field under cover of darkness, using torches to light their path. Though killers are known to return to sites that carry significance to their crimes, it remains unknown if any of the people captured in this footage is in any way involved in Victoria's murder. Were these people locals who felt morbidly drawn to check out the location of the discovery of a body in their community? Or were their visits to the site perhaps entirely unrelated to the case? On July 28, 2021, police would announce that their renewed inquiries had resulted in the formal arrest of a suspect who had never previously been arrested in the case. The suspect in question was taken into police custody for questioning and subsequently released under investigation. Though police have never named the suspect, the Telegraph newspaper would reveal that the arrested man was Stephen Wright, also known as the Suffolk Strangler. In February of 2008, Stephen Wright was convicted for the murders of 5 women in the Suffolk area and subsequently sentenced to life in prison with a judge's recommendation that he never be released. Wright targeted sex workers in the Ipswich area of Suffolk and carried out all 5 of his known murders in the span of approximately 40 days between October and December of 2006. His victims include 19-year-old Tanya Nicol, who was murdered on October 30th, her body found on December 8th. A pathologist could not determine a cause of death. 25-year-old Gemma Adams, murdered on November 15th, her body discovered on December 2nd. Again, a cause of death could not be determined. The 24-year-old Anneli Alderton murdered on December 3rd, her body found on December 10th. Her cause of death was found to be asphyxiation. 29-year-old Annette Nichols murdered on approximately December 8th, her body discovered on December 12th. Again, no cause of death could be ascertained. The last of Wright's known victims is 24-year-old Paula Clennell, murdered on around December 9th. Her body was discovered days later, also on December 12th. Her cause of death was asphyxiation. Like Victoria Hall, all of the women had been found naked, and none had been sexually assaulted. Bizarrely, Wright had intentionally left his victims' bodies in a cruciform position, with their arms stretched out by their sides. It's unknown if Victoria had been left in a similar fashion. In the years following Wright's conviction, he has been linked to the vanishing and presumed murder of estate agent Susie Lamplugh, who vanished from Fulham, West London in 1986. Susie worked alongside Wright on board British ocean cruise liner the QE2, and the pair were even photographed together. Though Metropolitan Police suspect that another man, James Cannon, is actually responsible for Susie's vanishing. Wright is also a suspect in the disappearance of 26-year-old Amanda Duncan, a Suffolk sex worker who vanished from Ipswich in 1993, as well as 28-year-old sex worker Kelly Pratt, who hasn't been seen since June 2000. She vanished from Norwich, just 45 miles away in the East Anglia area. Cleveland police, located some 250 miles away in the town of Middlesbrough, have not ruled out a link between Stephen Wright and the murder of 21-year-old sex worker Vicky Glass, who was killed in September of the year 2000. Wright had previously also been linked with the 1992 murder of 16-year-old Norwich girl Natalie Pearman and the 2002 murder of 22-year-old Michelle Bettles, also from Norwich. Both had been involved in sex work. Though both of these crimes remain unsolved, DNA evidence has since excluded Stephen Wright in both of these crimes. As of January 2023, Wright is still under police investigation in the case of Victoria Hall, which remains, for now, unsolved. Speaking in 2022, Detective Chief Superintendent Andy Smith, the senior investigating officer in Victoria's case, said, quote, "The investigation into the tragic murder of 17-year-old Victoria Hall in 1999 remains a high priority for Suffolk Constabulary. The inquiry team are totally committed to bringing the person or persons responsible for her dreadful murder to justice. To the Hall family, the wait for justice goes on. If you have any information in the case of Victoria Hall, please contact Suffolk Constabulary on 01473 782 059, quoting Operation Avon, or Crimestoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111.